Imagine being stranded in the immense isolation of the northern Pacific, the fog thick and the water black, held completely immobile by a silent, massive circle of the ocean's apex predators. This wasn't a quick encounter. This was 8 grueling hours of absolute terror, a hostage situation where the captors were killer whales and the only weapon they used was patience. The crew of the small fishing vessel Sea Wanderer didn't expect to survive the day, yet what unfolded didn't end in violent attack or screaming panic. It ended in devastating silence, and tears streaming down the faces of hardened fishermen. This is a story about the ocean's silent plea, and it will change how you view these magnificent creatures forever. Before we delve into the churning waters of the Bering Sea and the impossible decision Captain Alistair faced, take just a moment, hit that like button and subscribe, because you absolutely won't want to miss how this story, born from fear, bloomed into overwhelming compassion. For 8 long, agonizing hours, the pod of 7 adult orcas maintained a perfect, deliberate encirclement. They were not merely passing by or casually feeding. This was a synchronized, intentional maneuver, focusing all their attention on the 30-foot vessel. Every time Captain Alistair nudged the throttle, hoping to break free, the massive black bodies pressed closer, their dorsal fins cutting the water just yards from the hull. It was an undeniable message: you are staying here. The initial dread quickly morphed into a chilling, profound realization. They weren't being hunted, but they were certainly being held. These weren't the playful breaches you see in tourist videos. These were silent, focused guards, their ancient, intelligent eyes locked onto the 4 men trapped aboard. The crew, battered by years of brutal offshore work, were paralyzed not just by fear, but by the unnerving silence of the attack. The Bering Sea is a domain of ice and unforgiving cold, a brutal mistress that demands respect. For Alistair and his crew, Mick, Ben, and Silas, it was simply the office. They were 150 miles offshore, the nearest help days away even at full speed. The day had started with the routine success of a good halibut haul, the usual metallic tang of diesel and the comforting rhythmic chug of the engine filling the air. Then the Orcas arrived. The first sight was beautiful, a massive black dorsal fin slicing through the choppy, gray surface. The second was unsettling, a perfect formation tightening around them. The silence that fell over the men was more deafening than a rogue wave. Alistair tried to radio their coordinates, but the choppy atmosphere muffled their frantic calls. They were ghosts on the water, surrounded by sentinels of the deep. He cursed under his breath, thinking through every potential offense they might have committed. Had they fished too close to a known hunting ground? Had they inadvertently crossed the path of a newborn? Every veteran sailor knows the rule: you do not provoke an orca pod. They are the definition of coordinated power, capable of capsizing small vessels for sport. Now their ship, the Sea Wanderer, felt less like a sturdy fishing boat and more like a fragile cork bobbing in a sea of focused hostility. Hour 3 dragged into Hour 5. The fuel gauge was a grim reminder of their dwindling resources. The sun, a pale disk in the Alaskan sky, began its slow, agonizing tilt towards the horizon, threatening to plunge them into darkness where the Orcas' advantage would become absolute. The crew shouted, they banged pots, they tried everything to create noise and scare the pod away, a desperate attempt to break the pattern. But the Orcas remained fixed, moving slowly, rhythmically, their breath loud in the still air. It was a suffocating, psychological attack. But then, a subtle pattern interrupt occurred. Ben, shivering despite his thick thermal gear, pointed toward the stern. One of the largest females, easily 25 feet long with a towering, sweeping dorsal fin, wasn't circling in the aggressive manner of the others. She was performing a strange, repetitive dance just beneath the stern, dipping her massive head and body repeatedly, almost frantically, against the rudder. It didn't look like an attack maneuver. It looked like profound, desperate distress. She was struggling to stay buoyant, constantly shifting her enormous weight, forcing the men to rethink the nature of the encirclement entirely. If you thought this was just a simple story of a few whales holding a boat captive, you are entirely mistaken. This is the precise moment when 4 battle-hardened fishermen realized the horrifying, devastating purpose of the Orca siege. The boat wasn't the target, it was the mechanism. It was the only available tool in a situation of life and death, and the Orcas were pleading for human intervention. Alistair knew he had to see what the massive female was so desperately trying to hide or protect. Against all conventional wisdom and the primal instinct to keep clear, he grabbed the small submersible camera rigged onto a long, flexible pole, usually reserved for inspecting nets. He lowered it slowly, painstakingly, into the murky, frigid water, guiding the lens toward the constantly struggling female beneath the stern. The images flickered onto the small cabin monitor. The initial view was chaotic: churning water, the immense black and white pattern of the Orca's belly, and then, the devastating stabilization. The sight stole the breath from every man in the wheelhouse. The large female was not struggling to attack, she was struggling to keep a smaller, much more fragile shape afloat. Clutched precariously between her jaw and pectoral fin was a juvenile, perhaps only weeks or months old. And wrapped tightly, irrevocably around the small whale's delicate tail flukes was a deadly, unforgiving web of synthetic deep-set monofilament fishing line. It was a heavy, discarded net, cinching down tighter with every frightened kick the calf made, pulling the little whale downwards, drowning it slowly and painfully. The entire pod was not attacking the boat. They were desperately guarding their dying young, surrounding the only object on the water capable of cutting the thick plastic threads that were murdering their child. Their intense focus, their refusal to leave, was a desperate, silent plea for human intervention, the very intervention they normally avoid at all costs. The emotional impact was immediate and physical. The cold fear that had gripped Alistair and his crew for hours instantly evaporated, replaced by a searing, undeniable empathy. They weren't surrounded by predators. They were surrounded by parents mourning a tragedy, using the only language available to them, presence and persistence, to beg for help. The tears started immediately, blurring the monitor screen, a reaction born not of terror, but of profound, shared pain. They were facing an impossible risk, a life-and-death choice to descend into the water with 7 massive orcas, but in that moment, there was no choice at all. They had to act, and they had to act now. The water is freezing, the orcas are massive and hyperprotective, and the clock is ticking down to the final breaths of the trapped calf. You absolutely must see what happens when the crew risks everything to save a life that is not their own. Do you think they succeed in navigating the immense danger to free the little whale? Hit the subscribe button now and like this video. And tell us in the comments below, from which country or city are you watching this incredible, emotional moment unfold? The rhythmic breaths of 50 apex predators had become the soundtrack to their confinement. Every exhalation was a slow, controlled burst of mist, echoing the tension that gripped the small crew aboard the Sea Wanderer. They were trapped not by force, but by the overwhelming, silent dedication of the pod. Hours had bled into an eternity, each passing minute solidifying the terrifying reality. This was not a casual observation. This was a deliberate maneuver. But what they eventually saw, nestled in the heart of that terrifying circle, changed everything they thought they knew about the wild, shattering their understanding of instinct and revealing a truth so pure it brought men to their knees. This is the moment the mystery begins to unravel, and trust me, you do not want to miss a single second of this incredible, emotional journey. Before we dive deeper into the heartbreaking revelation, do me a huge favor, smash that subscribe button and give us a like if you believe in the power and the secrets the deep ocean holds. The water was a shifting canvas of deep, icy blues, the air sharp and thin off the Alaskan coast. 10 hours had passed since the first massive dorsal fin sliced the surface. The initial panic had given way to a kind of numb vigilance, a heavy watchfulness broken only by the cold, metallic rattle of the coffee pot. Captain Elias, a man whose face was usually etched with the confidence of 50 years at sea, now wore the pale, slack expression of total uncertainty. He stood clutching the rail, his eyes burning holes into the organized chaos surrounding his vessel. The orcas were not moving randomly. This was the key observation that drove the mystery deeper. There were 3 distinct concentric rings, shifting, merging, and reforming with the precision of a military operation. The innermost ring, tight against the Sea Wanderer's hull, consisted primarily of 5 enormous females and 1 scarred male. They moved slowly, their black and white patterns flashing beneath the surface like warning signals, ensuring the boat remained centered within the formation. The middle ring, looser and faster, constantly rotated, their immense speed creating a subtle, mesmerizing turbulence that confused the sonar readings and frustrated any attempt to look beneath the surface. And the outermost ring, the largest group, comprised of younger, perhaps more volatile animals, performed synchronized, shallow dives, creating a perimeter of noise and movement that kept every other creature, and every other boat, miles away. Elias lowered his binoculars, the plastic cold against his cheek. "They are guarding something," he rasped, the words thick with the realization of the danger they were in. "They're not interested in us. We're just part of their defense." The center of the formation remained the unanswered question. Every instinct told them the secret lay there, deep beneath the churning water generated by the pod's protective maneuvers. They deployed the small, highly maneuverable underwater drone, the diver, hoping to pierce the visual confusion. The drone dipped beneath the surface, immediately met with a wall of white noise, the intense, high-pitched clicks and whistles of the Orca's language, now amplified and distorted. It wasn't aggressive, but it was overwhelming, a cacophony of urgent communication. The first attempts failed instantly. The sheer size and proximity of the whales created a visual blockage. Every time the drone attempted to penetrate the core, one of the middle-ring whales would swoop past, its immense tail fluke narrowly missing the camera, kicking up clouds of sediment and obscuring the view. It was as if the Orcas understood the function of the tiny mechanical eye and were actively running interference. Hours dragged on. The sun was beginning its low, slow arc toward the horizon, painting the waves in bruised purples and ominous, reflective reds. The light was fading, and with it, the crew's hope of a quick resolution. The chilling lack of aggression was the most unnerving aspect. If they were predators interested in the boat, they would have tested the hull, bumped the rudder, shown some sign of hunger or territorialism. But their focus was singular, absolute, and directed inward. The sounds became more intense, changing pitch and frequency. The clicks morphed into long, mournful whistles, sounds that seemed less like communication and more like lament. This auditory shift was the first pattern interrupt, sending a fresh wave of unease through the crew. These were not the triumphant calls of hunters. These were the cries of animals under immense stress. Then, the largest male of the inner circle, the scarred one they had named Iron Jaw, did something entirely unexpected. He stopped his slow circle directly adjacent to the port side, closer than any whale had dared come, mere feet from the metal hull. Instead of diving, he angled his body, slowly raising his massive head almost entirely out of the water. For a staggering, terrifying second, Ironjaw's giant, intelligent eye, dark and glistening, made direct, sustained contact with the men standing on the deck. The moment was transformative. It wasn't the look of a wild beast sizing up prey. It was the intense, focused gaze of an ancient being desperately trying to convey information. There was no menace in the eye, only a vast, aching sorrow. It was a silent plea, a profound attempt at cross-species communication that instantly dismantled the fear in the crew and replaced it with a crushing wave of pity. If you are feeling the intense emotional weight building in this story, trust me, the heartbreaking core of this mystery is exactly what these majestic animals were trying to share. The reason they were holding this boat hostage is far more tragic and beautiful than anyone on board could have ever imagined. Inspired by the eye contact, the drone operator, Miguel, maneuvered the diver for a final, desperate attempt. He didn't try to go fast. He moved it slowly, patiently, following the wake of the circling Orcas, allowing the protective movement to guide the camera rather than fight it. The light was now critically low, but the water in the absolute center of the pod seemed momentarily clearer, stabilized by the deep, vertical bodies of the surrounding females. And then, the screen flickered, resolving the picture. It wasn't a whale. Not a seal. It wasn't a struggling sea lion or a piece of drift netting. What the drone captured in the fleeting moment of clarity was small, vulnerable, and moving erratically. It was a newborn orca calf, tiny against the scale of its massive relatives. But the calf wasn't just swimming. It was struggling, its small black body fighting against an unseen constraint. Before the drone could stabilize for a better shot, the massive back of a female, one of the tightest guard members, surfaced slowly in the center, lifting the calf gently onto her back, as if attempting to carry it above the water line, trying to alleviate its distress. But as the female arched her back, the crew saw it. Wrapped tightly around the calf's diminutive tail flukes, pulling them unnaturally taut and restricting its movement, was a thick, dark bundle of synthetic rope. It was old, heavy, and deeply embedded. The calf was trapped, bound by the cruel debris of human civilization. The entire pod was not guarding a territory or a kill. They were protecting an injured baby, holding a defensive perimeter against the vast, indifferent ocean while simultaneously seeking help, a desperate, high-stakes triad. They had maintained this complex, exhausting siege for 10 hours, pinning the sea wanderer not as a threat, but as their last, best hope. The revelation hit the crew like a physical blow. The organized patterns, the silent appeals, the stress calls, it was all agonizing parental devotion, magnified 50-fold. The immediate terror vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, agonizing surge of compassion. They had been afraid of the monsters. The monsters were mourning their suffering child. Captain Elias collapsed onto the deck railing, the binoculars swinging uselessly from his neck. Miguel let out a choke sound, covering his mouth as the reality settled. They weren't prisoners of the sea. They were witnesses to a plea for intervention, a desperate cry for human help in the deepest sense of the word. They had the means to cut the rope, but now the challenge was even more immense. How do you convince a protective ring of 50 majestic, heartbroken apex predators that you are no longer a stationary threat, but an active, gentle rescuer? The sun was setting, visibility was dropping fast, and they knew they had to breach that sacred, sorrowful circle before the light failed entirely, or the exhausted calf would be lost forever. What they do next determines the fate of that fragile life and the crew's very survival. The task seems impossible, navigating the emotional barrier and the physical danger presented by the most dedicated parents in the ocean. Make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification bell right now so you don't miss the conclusion to this incredible story. Give us a like if you were moved by the Orca's devotion, and comment below to let us know what country or city you are watching from. We'll see you in part 3 for the breathtaking rescue. The churning stopped. For 96 terrifying seconds, the relentless clicking and whistling of the Orca pod ceased, leaving a void of sound so complete it was more deafening than the hours of aquatic siege had been. The crew of the Mariner froze, their breath held tight in their chests, staring at the dark, buoyant mass that bobbed just 30 feet from their stern. It was the moment of reckoning, the final, agonizing chapter in a confrontation that had tested the limits of their sanity. If you have been following this incredible saga, you know the fear they faced, trapped in the vast emptiness of the North Pacific, circled not by predators, but by something far more complex. Before we reveal the unbelievable truth of what the Orcas were pushing toward them, please take a moment right now to hit that like button and subscribe. We have so many more stories of the ocean's deepest mysteries waiting for you, and you absolutely cannot miss the ending of this one. They had endured 8 hours of constant harassment, 8 hours where the giant, monolithic bodies of the Orcas had used their bulk and their intelligence to corral the steel fishing boat. But now, in the silence, the nature of the confrontation shifted. It was no longer a siege, it was a delivery. The black, rubbery object, pushed by the massive dorsal fin of the alpha female just moments earlier, rocked gently in the wake. It was unmistakably human in origin, a piece of sophisticated equipment. A life vest, perhaps, or a sealed storage bag. But the size was wrong. It was too small for standard gear, too oddly shaped. Captain Elias, his face etched with exhaustion and dread, knew the decision had arrived. They could stay paralyzed by fear and watch the object drift away, possibly taking their only chance at an answer with it, or they could risk everything and reach out into the water. "Get the gaff hook," Elias rasped, his voice raw from disuse. "Carefully. We're going to retrieve it. I need 2 men on the deck, ropes tied to your belts. The rest of you, watch the perimeter. If they move, we pull back immediately." The tension was suffocating. Every movement felt like a violation of a silent, primal treaty. Marco, the youngest crewman, secured himself with trembling hands and slowly extended the long, aluminum gaff over the railing. The boat groaned softly beneath them, emphasizing the fragility of their mechanical world against the immense, organic power surrounding them. The water, normally an indiscriminate gray-blue, now seemed to possess a crystalline clarity near the object, highlighting its unsettling nature. It took Marco 3 agonizing attempts, the wind and wave motion conspiring against him, before the hook snagged the object's rugged material. The moment the object made contact with the deck, the silence was violently shattered. The water around the mariner erupted. Not with aggression, but with a sudden, deafening chorus of clicks, whistles, and deep, resonant moans, a sound Elias would later describe as the most powerful and meaningful communication he had ever witnessed. It was not a battle cry. It sounded, impossibly, like satisfaction. They pulled the object closer, tearing away the seaweed and debris plastered to its sides. It wasn't a life vest, nor was it a piece of debris. It was a partially deflated, specialized emergency survival suit, the kind used in extreme northern latitudes. The material was thick, designed to withstand deep, freezing temperatures. As they rotated the heavy suit, they saw the zipper, and the small, pale face pressed against the clear plastic visor. The realization hit them with the force of a rogue wave. There was a person inside. Not just a person, but a child. A boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, and possibly small within the voluminous fabric of the suit. He was unconscious, dangerously still, but the small cloud of condensation inside the visor proved he was still breathing. The immediate terror the crew had felt for hours dissolved instantly, replaced by a devastating, protective urgency. They were no longer targets of a mysterious marine aggression. They had been co-opted into a rescue mission far greater than they could have imagined. This was why the Orcas had been circling. This was the reason for the relentless, precise pressure. They hadn't been trapping the crew, they had been ensuring the dark shape, the precious cargo, did not drift away into the crushing current. They had been delivering a human life. For hours, the pod, the greatest apex predators on the planet, had acted as silent, unwavering shepherds, using their massive bodies to guide the vulnerable suit toward the only safe haven in the entire expanse of the ocean, the metal hull of the human vessel. They had created a moving barrier, a wall of flesh and intelligence, keeping the small boy from being swallowed by the ocean's vast indifference. If you are struggling to comprehend this profound act of interspecies empathy, remember this feeling right now. This is the moment the narrative flips, and the true meaning of the encounter reveals itself. Elias barked orders, his voice now steady and filled with purpose. "Get the medic kit! Get him inside! Careful with that zipper, Marco, do not let the cold air hit him all at once." The scene that followed was a blur of frantic, purposeful activity. Unzipping the suit was a monumental task, the cold water having seized the mechanism. When they finally managed to peel back the layers of rubber and foam, the boy was shivering violently, hypothermia already setting in. But he was alive. As the crew rushed the boy into the galley, wrapping him in every blanket they could find, they glanced back at the open deck. The Orca pod, which had maintained its vigil for hours, was gone. The sea was empty. The water stretched out, flat and deceptively calm, reflecting the brilliant late afternoon sun. There was no farewell call, no celebratory breach. They simply vanished, their mission completed the instant the child was safely on board the human vessel. It was an acknowledgement, a silent trust. They had delivered the package, and the humans were now responsible for the conclusion of the rescue. A wave of overwhelming emotion crashed over the hardened fisherman. Marco sank to his knees on the wet deck, heedless of the cold. Elias leaned heavily against the rail, staring at the empty expanse where the black fins had cut through the water only moments before. It was a sudden, profound understanding of the universe's delicate balance, and of their own previous arrogance. They had judged the Orcas as monsters, as dangerous, unpredictable forces of nature, when in reality, the pod had exemplified a level of compassionate intelligence that far surpassed their own capacity for fear and self-preservation. Tears streamed down Elias's cheeks, mixing with the salt spray. They cried not just from relief that the siege was over, or from the sheer joy of pulling a child back from the brink of death, but from a deeper, more shaming realization. They were crying for the Orcas. They were crying for their own misunderstanding, for the primal fear that had blinded them to the clear, directional purpose of the pod. The Orcas had risked exposure, they had spent hours guiding the child, pushing him, and enduring the stress of human proximity, all to achieve a selfless act of rescue. The boy, whose name they later learned was Finn, had been separated from a small research vessel 2 days earlier, swept overboard during a sudden squall. His survival suit had kept him alive, but the massive, freezing current would have carried him hundreds of miles away from any shipping lane, ensuring his inevitable death. Only the Orcas, with their relentless patrol and astonishing collective awareness, had found him. And instead of viewing the small human as prey, or simply ignoring the unfamiliar object, they saw a vulnerability that demanded protection. The men of the Mariner spent the next several hours warming Finn, hydrating him, and signaling their position to the Coast Guard. They told the rescue crews of their miraculous find, but they kept the most unbelievable detail to themselves: the precise, intentional, selfless behavior of the Orca pod. They knew, intuitively, that it was a story too fantastic, too emotional, to be immediately believed. It was a secret trust shared only among the men who had seen the true face of the ocean's greatest mind. The rescue of Finn concluded the immediate crisis, but the implications of the Orca's actions resonated through the lives of the crew forever. They returned to shore forever changed, their perception of the ocean shifting from a resource to be exploited, to a complex, intelligent world demanding respect and reverence. The moment the Orcas vanished, leaving the saved boy in their care, became the defining experience of their lives, a powerful, emotional reminder that humanity does not hold a monopoly on empathy, compassion, or the desperate will to save a life. This story of the Orca's breathtaking intervention proves that the most powerful connections are often found in the deepest, wildest corners of our world. If this incredible tale touched you, if the realization of the Orca's true purpose brought tears to your eyes, please show your support. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more stories of profound and unbelievable connections, and tell us in the comments below, from what country or city are you watching this stunning display of marine compassion? Your answers help us bring these vital, emotional narratives to the world. Thank you for listening.